years later, I actually got to, Stan Lee was walking through a hotel lobby at San Diego, and I had seen that people were trying to like crowd around him and everything, and his handlers were trying to get him to the elevator. And I was like, I'm actually in this hotel, so I'm just going to go up to my room. I'm gonna ride that elevator because I'm not hounding Stan Lee. I'm going to my room. And as we were on the way, I was like, I think we were waiting for the elevator, and I told him like, hey, I write a book called Mouse Guard, and I had my "with great power comes great responsibility" moment where I wrote, this character's trying to inspire another one. It matters not what you fight, but what you fight for. And he kind of like, you could tell he's like a little bit over the whole, I'm getting bombarded with people. But when I said that, he kind of turned and he went, ooh, that's good. And then he got in the elevator, and I was like, I'm not getting in that elevator. I'm not ruining this. Like, that was enough. That was enough. I think he even, like, once he got in the elevator, just turned and went, good night. Have a good night.
Welcome to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today's guest, straight out of Lockhaven, is the Eisner Award-winning and Harvey Award-winning David Peterson of Mouse Guard. How are you?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing all right.
Thanks for having me.
People may not realize this if they're new to the channel, but I've actually interviewed you before. So a lot of the questions that I normally would ask somebody for the first time, I'm going to place it in the link down below this video.
Oh, okay.
So you guys can read that and then come back here. So Mouse Guard is coming back in July with the Owlhand Caregiver. It's been a while. We've missed it.
It has been a while, and I don't want to. I want to manage people's expectations. I know that when Boom and Archaea got the press release, they want people excited about this issue, but I also want to. I want to kind of manage people's expectations. It's a one-shot issue. This isn't Mouse Guard coming back as a ongoing series yet. I am working on the next volume, but bear with us. We had enough content to put out a quick issue just to kind of give everyone an appetizer and a amuse-bouche while you're all patiently waiting for the next book. But that's what this is.
So this is three separate stories, right?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about those stories?
They are short stories for Free Comic that I originally had done for Free Comic Book Day, sort of. So the first time I did a Free Comic Book Day story, I wanted to do something that was... I realized that Free Comic Book Day has this interesting challenge of you're trying to get new readers in, you're trying to quickly introduce them to what your book is, but also you have longtime fans who need something that they're going to feel satisfied with. They don't need a re-intro. And the first one of those I don't feel like it worked. We ended up using it as a prologue in the Black Axe book. It works fine as a prologue, but I think as a standalone Free Comic Book Day story, it didn't work. And then we were doing the Legends of the Guard series, the spin-off anthology where all these people were telling tall tales and legends. And I was like, that looks like fun. And I'm letting everybody else do it in my world instead of letting myself do it. So I decided my Free Comic Book Day stories would be these like short little parables, little morality plays, little bedtime stories with some kind of overarching lesson. And, we published a collection of those already called Baldwin the Brave and Other Tales.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had a couple that have been published since that we didn't have enough to put, a full book together yet, but there are people who aren't familiar with those stories because it's been long enough. And then during the pandemic, I did another one that has not seen publication. I released it kind of digitally on my Twitch stream. I had Meredith Salinger, the actress and voice actress, come in and read the story aloud just to my Twitch audience with the idea that, okay, this one goes into the drawer with the other ones so that eventually we'll have enough that we can publish a book. And just talking internally with my editors at Archaea, we said, let's get these out. but yeah, it's there. I'm sorry, that's a really long answer about the length of the stories and why they were created instead of what they actually are. They're
Cool.
they're stories about a lot of it has to do with compassion, actually, and understanding your neighbor, and trying to think of group versus self. The title one, the Owl Hen Caregiver, was about it's about compassion when it's the end of someone's life.
Okay.
I had actually written that one, or written the frame of it, the seed of it, a long time ago, when a friend of mine, his dad was going through the final days in hospice, and my friend Nate Pride was right by his side and going through that whole experience of being that last minute caregiver, and having to watch someone go through all that. And Nate is very much a person who thinks of everyone else before himself, like almost to his own detriment. Yeah, he's just he's a very kind and giving person that makes sure that everyone else is taken care of. And see him go through that end of days process with his dad was enlightening and heartbreaking and heartwarming all at the same time. So I wrote the framework for that, and then when my mom was passing, and then she finally did pass after a long time of her not having any real quality of life. It kind of cracked part of the story for me. I was like, okay, now I have even a personal stake in this, and it's about that end of day compassion. And some of it's about even like criticisms that I heard from other people where they saw the amount of time I was taking with my mom, or how it was affecting, we weren't getting more mouse guard. And people saying like, oh, isn't there a better use of your time? Like, shouldn't somebody else be doing this caregiving for her? Shouldn't you, just put her in a home,
I don't.
put her in? And
Yeah.
I was like, and not, it wasn't fans. I mean, some of it was some of it was family members. So we're legitimately worried about like my my career, my means of supporting myself. I was putting so much on hold. And I appreciate the concern, absolutely. But yeah, it all came down to this compassionate thing, this humanity, this connection. So yeah, that's the Owl Hen Caregiver story, and then there's another one that's about learning the languages of other beasts, and there's one about that's basically my version of Peter and the Wolf.
Yeah.
That's more about what you risk, what's at stake, that you could potentially, even if you're not risking your own life, you could be risking the lives of everyone around you by your own foolish choices. And then, yeah, when we're ready, so two of those, being compassionate, listening to others, having an open mind, thinking that because someone's your enemy doesn't mean that they don't have something important to say. That stuff was all written a long time ago. And then once I got the Owl Hen Caregiver story done about the end of life stuff, we kind of looked at this and was like, well, these thematically, these three stories really go together and really speak to stuff that's going on right now. So we decided to put it out as a single issue, and make sure that people have a chance to read those stories if they didn't get them already, and obviously get a chance to see the new one in print.
I have so many questions that's coming out of that answer.
That was a really long answer, so I'm not surprised. Go for it.
Speaking of compassion, obviously it's been a hell of a year. But does that, you were very active and very prominent in Free Comic Book Day until around 2015. Does that pretty much explain why you stopped producing Free Comic Book Day?
No, Free Comic Book Day, and I might not have all the details correct here. So if there are people out there who know better, forgive some of my ignorance. But kind of my big picture view is, Diamond helps facilitate Free Comic Book Day by kind of laying some groundwork. And most of it's there to make sure that publishers aren't trying to take advantage of comic store owners aren't trying to take advantage of creators, etc. It's trying to make sure everybody's playing on a level playing field. And one of the things that Diamond saw that was happening with Free Comic Book Day publications is that publishers were putting out things that were samplers. They were putting out things that were a few pages of something that's going to be on the shelf in a month. So it was basically like a 4 or 5 page ad that said, to see what happens next, pick up X title, or not an X title like Marvel X title.
Title X.
Yes, pick up, well, yeah.
It's still,
pick up title A.
title.
Well, that now it's Avengers. Shoot, you know what I mean? Yeah, pick up generic title next month to see what actually, to get the full issue. And it was an ad. Or the stories weren't fulfilling enough where you're really showing a new person coming in what this medium is. And so there was kind of I don't know, edict is probably the wrong word, but there was like an edict that went down where Diamond kind of said, hey, we're really encouraging publishers not to put together anthologies or sampler style issues. And so my stories, and I think, Boom, Boom Archaea, they did have a couple of those style ad like offerings within a grouping, out of 4 stories or 5 stories that might be in an issue for a Free Comic Book Day issue, there might be one that was really just 5 pages of something that's coming out in a little bit, and it's basically a long ad. They were guilty of some of that as well. My stories always had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah, your stories were standalone.
Yeah, they completely stood on their own. They just weren't a full issue's length, but they worked just like any other issue in terms of its storytelling model. But yeah, when publishers were encouraged not to do this, that first year that kind of went out, Boom did turn to me and say, do you want to do a full issue then for the next Free Comic Book Day? The issue's yours. If you like, we'll give you the space if you want it. And there just wasn't enough time for me to try to turn around a full issue that was also going to be a free issue. Like I couldn't. I couldn't do that. And I was like, it's not going to happen this year. Maybe in the future we can talk about that. And then, yeah, it just never kind of came back around. And the short stories really kind of suit what I want to do. Yeah. So, and then obviously stuff had gotten kind of jumbled up with Free Comic Book Day recently. And yeah, so it hasn't resurfaced as an option.
So I'm not sure what my favorite Mouse Guard story is, but if pressed, I might actually say it's the Tale of the White Weaver. Because I just thought it was really clever. But Baldwin the Brave, I got to tell you, when it came out, we lined up for Free Comic Book Day and then it ran out and everything. On the Facebook sellers group in the Philippines, then it was being sold for the equivalent of $10 like the next day. Like, it's the only free comic book on Free Comic Book Day that got that treatment.
Yeah. That was so for people who maybe don't know, the first time the Baldwin the Brave story, which we later produced as its own standalone Mouse Guard thing, but it was one of those sampler style comics, and it was produced as a hardcover. It was a free comic. It was a smaller kind of digest sized thin hardcover that Archaea put out. And the guy who ran Archaea at the time, I wasn't so much a fan of his business decisions, but he had this idea where he go, because store owners pay for issues. Like the store owners pay for those comics that are in the store on Free Comic Book Day. The idea is the publisher is only supposed to charge what it costs to print it. They can't charge for what it costs for the talent. They can't charge any kind of profit or margin. The idea is just the printing costs. So the guy who ran Archaea said, here's what I want to do. I really want to get Archaea to stand out. I want there to be a buzz around Archaea. I'm willing to only charge retailers what they would normally pay for an issue, a floppy issue. I'm going to charge them that, but I'm going to give them a hardcover. The discrepancy in the print cost, we're going to chalk up as like an advertising cost. And I was like, that's risky. But okay, well, if you're only going to charge because at first I thought he was going to charge like the hardcover fee. And I'm like, no retailer is going to pay that right off the bat. And yeah, he did it that way, and it worked really well. And there was a weird gap in time where the Diamond Retailer Summit, which is, you know, this group where all the retailers, all the publishers, and Diamond reps all come together to kind of do like, it's like Festivus. It's the airing of grievances. They all just
Festivus for the rest of us.
Yeah, you did this, you did this, you could do better here, you could do better here. And everybody kind of gets their moment to go, here's my problems with the industry. And when that retailer summit happened, the Free Comic Book Day books had already been shipped to retailers, but Free Comic Book Day was still like 6 days away, something like that. There was a weird time thing where it just happened to be that way. So that guy who was in charge of Archaea got up on stage and during his moment, and he goes, okay, retailers who are in the room, I want to know, now that you've seen this hardcover, now that you've seen what Archaea is giving you, what our quality is, what would you have paid to have this as a Free Comic Book Day issue without changing your order number, without it affecting how many of these you would have ordered? What's your top line? And they ended up saying, as a consensus, basically what it costs to print that as a hardcover. So as a proof of concept that moving forward, Archaea could have kept doing hardcovers for Free Comic Book Day because retailers were willing to pay it. And then there was the next year, for some reason, Archaea didn't do a hardcover. They did a soft cover. And then the year after that, they went back to hardcover, but I think enough time had passed that it kind of messed up the model of what retailers knew to pay or wanted to pay or whatever. And yeah.
And I think at some point that's when Boom bought them, right?
Yeah, I think Boom bought the year after the second hardcover.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. When Mouse Guard starts, we were introduced to three mice, Liam, Saxon, and Kenzie, and I was reading it again over the past week to prep for this. And I've followed your work for at least 11 years at this point, that I think I may have forgotten this little detail. When we first get introduced to these three mice, we instantly know who they are by the body language and the expressions on their faces. And I just wanted to ask, like, how did you manage to convey that with like such few lines on their faces and, you know, anatomy that is not recognizable to most people?
Yeah. I mean, as I've gone with Mouse Guard, I've had to teach myself how to get these characters to emote using few lines, and a lot of the tricks that artists get to use for expressions, I don't have at my disposal because I do their eyes as solid black. You know, like there's no whites to the eyes, just showing like a shift or a looking up or rolling the eye or all that kind of stuff I don't have available. They don't have eyebrows, so I can't do as much of the like facial expressions like that. Their mouths don't quite work the same way. So there's a lot of body language kind of stuff. And it's more about the eye shape. And it's been like on the job training ever since that first issue. And I with Saxon, Kenzie, and Liam, I really pared them down to these like very simple ideas at first. Like Kenzie's wise, Liam's new and young, optimistic, and Saxon is angry. And it was like, I think just through gesture and body language, you can portray those kinds of things, you know? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a trick. I'm still learning. I'm still figuring that stuff out.
And over in that book, The Art of Mouse Guard, you say that whole first issue, I mean, you weren't even sure you were going to be able to do the next 5. And that
there wasn't a next 5. There was, I mean, it was really just, I need to try getting an issue of something out. Let's do an issue. Yeah.
And then that was your on the job training. And I'm not sure I've seen many comics where many creators where the first comic was so strong.
I'm really lucky that it worked out that way.
But I think one of the reasons that your work looks so unique, aside from the square shape is because you're clearly influenced by things that are outside of comics. I mean, you see a lot of creators whose work is influenced by people in comics, and it ends up looking like a mishmash, or
Right.
which is, to
It
their
gets
credit.
it gets a little incestuous in terms of style.
The industry in general.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you get artists who are just influenced by other artists, and there aren't other outside influences like you're mentioning, is the stylistically it gets a little incestuous.
And the last time I talked to you, you mentioned N.C. Wyeth, Edmund Dulac, John Tenniel, who, for people you may not know, is the artist, the illustrator in the Alice in Wonderland books, and E.H. Shepard, who is Wind in the Willows and Winnie the Pooh. Mm-hmm. So you have this thing where you take realistic illustrations, but with anthropomorphized characters. So that's...
Yeah, I mean, I think every artist is some kind of either pick your metaphor. We're either a stew or we're some kind of a filter, where we take all these other influences and then somehow uniquely process it into something new that's us. Mm-hmm. That's what we produce. And yeah, whether you're being more influenced by tone and stylistic stuff that can come from prose, or if it's specifically visual things that are, about line quality or proportion or balance. If you're gathering from different sources, traditional, golden age book illustrators, it's good to have some comic book influence there too. There's a whole language to how to tell stories panel by panel in pictures. So you should have some familiarity and some influences there as well. But yeah, figuring out how to get all that stuff and then not just regurgitating, not just becoming a bad Jim Lee or a bad Mike Mignola or a bad Art Adams. Like,
you'd be the good Dave Peterson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So those are those are the artistic influences you named last time. But what about your writing influences? Because I see in very explicitly, there's a line in Fall that is from Watchmen. And
okay. That's not the one I thought you were going to point out. Yeah.
Oh, which one did you think I was going to point out?
A lot of people point out the very last line in Fall, "Winter is coming."
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And point to George R.R. Martin. And I had no knowledge of those books. I had never read them. It was long before the TV show existed.
Yeah.
No clue. I literally wrote that with the idea that, like, these are medieval creatures that would hole up for winter. Winter is going to be that's a brutal season when you're a tiny little creature. And we just finished Fall. Winter is coming.
Of course.
That's all it really meant. But people read all this other stuff in about Martin and the book series. And I was like, oh, no, that's not an influence for me. Nothing against it. It's just I wasn't familiar. The Watchmen one was intentional.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
And who else? Because also Kellenaw's name is a Star Wars reference.
Yeah. I think, a lot of people look at the Joseph Campbell stuff with the monomyth and the hero's journey kind of thing. And if you actually read Campbell's stuff, he's comparing ancient stories and ancient religions to get the monomyth. Well, in my high school humanities class, we studied a little bit about the Epic of Gilgamesh and reading the Bible as literature and other older texts and myths. But really, my day-to-day, my working vocabulary of Campbell's teachings is through the classic Star Wars trilogy. Mm-hmm. And it's because it follows it so directly that I have those references as my jumping off points for what is classic storytelling that's been going on since we were, just oral storytellers before we were even writing this stuff down. So yeah, Star Wars is kind of my index directory, I guess, of Campbell's teachings. The other thing I credit as a writing point is role-playing games.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons. Creating stories together as a group, whether you're playing something that's like Mouse Guard in terms of medieval fantasy, but we also played in my group in middle school and high school, we played a lot of superhero role-playing games. We played the Ninja Turtles role-playing game, what was set in modern times. We played Robotech. We played a lot of Shadowrun. We played lots of stuff. We played lots of role-playing games. And it really doesn't matter what the genre is or what the tone or who the characters are. It's about this group kind of sitting down and collectively deciding to tell a story.
Yeah.
And you know when that story is working when everybody's excited. Everybody around this, even if bad stuff is happening to your character, you're on the edge of your seat. You're wanting for it to be your turn next. You're scanning over your character sheet. What can I do to influence this? Oh, I've got an idea, but I can't tell you because you're in another room. Crap. You know, everyone is engaged, is participating, is trying to make this story more interesting. If it's not going well as an adventure, which obviously happens, I've run bad adventures for people. People are getting snacks, getting up and leaving the room to go get snacks way more often than they normally would. People are, are having to be reminded, like, wait, what's going on? Where's so-and-so's character? I wasn't paying attention. Like, that's not a good story. So you kind of learn storytelling and writing through this very dynamic process of having this instant feedback from participants who are helping you write this story.
It's like workshopping it on the fly.
Very much.
You ever play the Watchmen role-playing game?
No. I only know about its existence because of one of the Watchmen supplement books showed some of the art from the from the supplement book.
I found
it was a Steve Jackson. It was already like a GURPS Steve Jackson thing, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah. But I found it funny because the scenarios were like, the bank is being robbed. It's like, well, that's the most urban role-playing game I've ever seen, I think. But anyway, one of the things that makes Mouse Guard, again, really unique, aside from the way you pull in all of these influences together, you have this catchphrase pretty much from the beginning. It matters not what you fight, but what you fight for. How'd that come about?
It just hit me. It was weird. In the original outline for the issue, it was like that scene just said, like, Kenzie says something inspiring to Liam. Like, Kenzie says something that reminds him of what the Guard is about.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came time to actually like work on those pages and dig down, I was like, I kept thinking of with great power comes great responsibility. It's like, I need something kind of like that, like the Ben Parker, Peter Parker thing. And somehow it matters not what you fight, but what you fight for. They were up against this snake, and Liam's like, it's crazy that you're talking about going back out there and fighting that snake. That thing, that's like a dragon. That thing's gonna kill us. And yeah, it was like, how do I get across the point of fighting something that's bigger than you? And it's worth fighting for if it matters. So I came up with that years later. I actually got to. Stan Lee was walking through a hotel lobby at San Diego, and I had seen that people were trying to like crowd around him and everything, and his handlers were trying to get him in the elevator. And I was like, I'm actually in this hotel, so I'm just going to go up to my room. I'm gonna ride that elevator because I'm not hounding Stan Lee. I'm going to my room. And as we were on the way, I was like, I think we were waiting for the elevator, and I told him, like, hey, I write a book called Mouse Guard, and I had my with great power comes great responsibility moment where I wrote, this character's trying to inspire another one. It matters not what you fight, but what you fight for. And he kind of like, you could tell he's like a little bit over the whole, I'm getting bombarded with people. But when I said that, he kind of turned and he went, ooh, that's good. And then he got in the elevator, and I was like, I'm not getting in that elevator. I'm not ruining this. Like, that was enough. That was enough. I think he even, like, once he got in the elevator, just turned and went, good night. Have a good night. And I'm like, yep, I'm good. I got my Stan Lee moment. Stan Lee decided that line was good.
But
we're golden.
The difference is, Peter Parker in all of these decades has never once questioned that line. With great power comes great responsibility. Mm-hmm. Within the second book, Winter, you already have someone, Kelena, questioning that line. How important is it to question what is the principle of the book so far?
What I realized is it's really easy for when you come up with some kind of a slogan, like that, it's really easy for it to be misinterpreted or perverted into somebody else's um, worldview that is actually maybe contrary to what you were originally doing. So it matters not what you fight, but what you fight for. Sounds great when you think about it just in these kind of like, yay, we're guard mice and we have to be brave. But I realized how easily perverted that becomes. The ends justify the means. It doesn't matter who you're killing. Kill your brother, kill your mother, kill your neighbor, as long as you're fighting for something that really you think is more important, that it matters to you. You know, and it's like, well, that's not at all what I meant. I don't want that. I don't want that at all. So I had Kellinaw kind of talk Liam through that, and even use examples from the first book that the villain, it didn't matter to him who he fought, what he fought, because he thought the way he saw the world was worth it. What he fought for was worth it. And then I have Kellinaw come up with one where I thought I had come up with a better slogan that has to do with the greater good. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, we're right back there again. Like it's just as pervertible. It's just as corruptible of a slogan. So it's not so much. I mean, I think question authority constantly. I think is a good thing to live by in general.
It's pervertible too, though.
Not that you necessarily, rude or overthrow authority. That's not what I'm saying. But question authority. I think that's safe so far. So I think that's a good thing. But more addressing it in the books was just about me realizing that it's easy for it to be misinterpreted, and I wanted to address blanket statements and misinterpretations.
I feel like we've gone through a lot of that in the last several years.
Yeah, and I mean, I was writing that back in 2009. The winter book was 2008, 2009 is when I was writing that one. So
yeah, even just if you go back to the original comic book catchphrase, "Truth, Justice, and the American Way," right? Like that one's really challenged for people to reconcile. How do you come up with the textures? Because I know you come from a printmaking background. How do you come up with the textures for Mouse Guard? Like you just stipple or?
Oh, with the inking stuff? Yeah. I mean, I stipple, I crosshatch, I come up with it's some of it's looking at printmaking techniques, some of it's looking at other illustrators or even comic book artists who are good with textures. The easiest to explain it to people who aren't necessarily artists, I think the easiest way to look at it is when you look at the variety of halftone screens in manga comics, or if you've even just seen sheets of halftone screens, all the different kind of dots, lines, squiggles, crosshatch, etc. And you can see how different densities of those dots, the size of the black space, that's the dot pattern or the cross hatching pattern or the whatever, the wavy lines, and then the white space in between them trick your eye into seeing some kind of a gray or some kind of a texture. So I'm just doing kind of an abstracted version of that using different lines, different stippling patterns to come up with something that looks a little more organic and hand drawn as opposed to a processed halftone screen. But it's just about trying to get different grays in there, and some of that comes from my printmaking background, but some of it's also just looking at how other illustrators have done that balance of white and black space to kind of fool your eye into seeing a gray.
And you do your own coloring too, right?
Yep.
So how much of when you're illustrating, how much of the coloring do you already have in mind?
It can depend. Sometimes I go in cold and I'm like, I don't know what the colors are going to be here. Other times I definitely have a plan because that can influence the inks. I don't tend to do big shadows, so I don't need to worry so much about that with where's the light source? Oh, I got to blast a shadow going the opposite direction. but if there is a light source, I still will probably do a slightly more abbreviated, less dense inking job in things that are specifically in a light source's way.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, sometimes I have that stuff in mind with where color is going to come from. I would say the coloring in my head, the bigger part of it is I'll know about areas that I want the ink work to be held as a color rather than having the ink as a black tone. I'll paint over just the line work and I'll do colors that way. So like if I've done something on a character's clothing that's supposed to be like embroidery on the black and white, you know, on the inked page, that's all just black ink work. But when I go to color it, I isolate just those things that are the design. I'll leave all the kind of contour lines as black, but the pattern becomes a color hold. And so a lot of times I have to think about that, which is, you know, it's part of the coloring process, but I have to think about it while I'm inking to make sure that it's possible to isolate these things as a color hold as I'm going. Yeah, it's a little inside baseball in terms of the like deep down technical stuff, but yeah.
Color holds are when you draw it on another sheet. Am I
my understanding is the original idea is like on cell animation, the hold color is the outline. So if you had like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo who has a green shirt, you'd want the outline of his shirt to be a darker version of what is the color inside the shirt. So you're holding the color over, but then where it gets to his arm, you would use a darker version of his skin tone. His hair would be the outline would be a darker version of his hair, etc. And so it's colorizing lines, it's painting lines. In Photoshop, I do it on a separate layer.
Okay.
But I'm inking it right on the page.
Speaking
digitally making a new layer.
Speaking of jumping in blind, you wrote the first two books, Fall and Winter, without a script.
Yeah. Well, Winter, I would write script sections for scenes as I went. I would have an outline for an issue, and then I'd go, okay, it's time to do this scene, and I would start to write some of the dialogue for that scene as I was drawing it. But I didn't have a script for the rest of the issue until I got to that next scene. And sometimes I'd go, I don't really need a script for this part. I just need to draw kind of what the outline dictates and I'll figure out some of the text. And then other times I'd go, I can't really draw this scene unless I know specifically what they're saying so I can get some panel beats going the way I want them. But yeah, I didn't write full issue scripts until I got to Black Axe.
I feel like that's the dungeon master in you. You can just improvise.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, I did it that way first, not just out of like ignorance or inexperience. It was because the first issue of Mouse Guard was my first ever comic. I had drawn a little thing for a college class. It wasn't even an art class. I mean, it was an art history class, but it was like the guy said, instead of turning in a term paper, you can do like some kind of other visual demonstration of the thing. And I was like, I'll just do a graphic novel, a little, short comic thing that explains this theory in art history. So I did that as a short, and I did one other 4-page short, but really Mouse Guard is the first thing that had a narrative that was a beginning, a middle, and end. And I was like, well, how do I do this? I'm just starting out as a comic artist. What's the main pitfall? What's the thing that every comic artist needs to do better at? And the advice I got unanimously was practice your storytelling. Make sure the story reads well, panel by panel, even if the word balloons aren't there. Mm-hmm. I thought, if I have dialogue that, like, if the drawing is weak, but I go, the word balloon will sell it, the text will sell it, they'll understand what's happening. So I thought, I don't want to have that crutch. I don't want to rely on the word balloon. So I prevented that by not even giving myself the words. I knew the actions of what was happening. I knew the sentiment, like Kenzie giving a motivational speech, like that's what this scene is about. I don't know what he's saying, but it's motivational speech.
So why did you choose to not work that way for Black Axe?
Oh, it kept evolving where I realized like I said, during Winter, there were times where I could draw scenes that I didn't need any script for. I just needed the outline. These 3 things happened during this scene. but then there were things that were more conversational, and I'd realize like I need to know what sentences I'm going to break up into which panels so that I can kind of get the impact of an expression or a close up or a distance shot or whatever during that conversation. So the need in Winter was already kind of showing me, okay, you need to have a little bit more pre-planning. And I got comfortable with that. And Black Axe also has an over narration happening through it. It's got captions narrating the whole thing, and so it was like, okay, I need to know what those are saying.
Yeah.
Before. So yeah, Black Axe, I just kind of jumped in full with that process.
It's got someone reading something over the whole story. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
So by your own admission, both Fall and Winter, they seem to end abruptly. I didn't actually think so because I read them in book form, so there were epilogues. So it didn't seem to end abruptly, but after reading Black Axe, I kind of see what you mean. So in Black Axe, you pretty much ended at issue 5, which I thought was an interesting idea. You take a full issue to do the epilogue.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there is an epilogue for Black Axe, but it's really short.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Fall, I finished, and Mark Smiley, who was head of Archaea at the time, was like, "Whew, that ended abruptly." And I was like, "Really? Did it?" I felt like, I mean, I guess. And he's like, "Yeah, it ends on like the next to last page. There's no kind of like wind down." So he's like, I hope you're thinking about an epilogue for the hardcover. And I was like, oh, I already was planning that. I wanted to do an epilogue no matter what. And he's like, okay, well, that'll help. But man, that did end kind of abruptly. So when I did Winter, I tried to be better about that. So Winter still ends a little abruptly, but I definitely think it's an improvement over Fall.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, with Black Axe, it was like, I want the last issue to be a wind down. I want the major stuff to end in issue 5.
And with Winter, especially with Winter, I thought it was interesting because you clearly trust your readers. You're not one of those people who will put a narration over what is currently happening. Like when Liam hits the owl in the leg, he hits the leg that Kellen doesn't hit in the previous issue.
You might be reading more in than I planned. I don't know that I planned it that way.
But no, I listened to your creator commentary.
Oh, did I say it in the creator commentary? Wow, I'm already forgetting things.
Yeah, I'm like, so they cripple both legs of the owl, and I'm like, you never ever mention it. If you're not paying close attention to this, you're not gonna
look
or
how
maybe
you
I
didn't
am
have to
reading
pay
into
attention. I don't even remember that I did that, and I did the creator commentary where I declared that I did that.
But
I had forgotten that.
But I think it's interesting because your narration never actually gets to, it never gets expository.
And all of those free comic book day stories that we mentioned that are in the Baldwin the Brave collection, and then now the ones that are going to be coming out in July in Alhen Caregiver, those all have a narration for most of them, for the body of the stories. And then Black Axe was that way. So now that I'm working on Weasel War, and it doesn't, it was a real like, oh, how do I do this again? I don't remember how I tell a story without somebody, essentially setting up scenes with once upon a time, and he wandered in feeling lonely, and he did this. It's like, oh, how do I do this kind of a story again? So I'm figuring that stuff out.
Interesting. How did you know I was going to ask about Weasel War? It's actually at the top of my list here.
It's the top of a lot of people's lists.
With that, I thought I think maybe I can ask about how to tell a shorter story versus how to tell a longer story, because I feel like the difference is with Fall and Winter, you're telling a story of 6 issues in 6 issues. With the Black Axe, though, I feel like you're telling a story that would normally take longer than 6 issues.
It will
in 6 issues, which is that what requires the narration? Or And with a shorter
I mean,
stories
I'm
too.
going to do Weasel War without narration.
Hmm.
It's going to be more like Fall and Winter. It's just longer. When I made a list of all the things that I knew needed to happen in Weasel War, both because there are things that like I know I want to do, but also looking back, you know, you do prep work, you look back at fall, you look back at winter, and you tick mark every thing that either is mentioned about Weasel War or things about characters that maybe needs to still be explained or at least taken into consideration. And when I look at all those things, I go, there's no way that this fits into 6 issues. This has to be. It's the Weasel War, right? It's the big thing. Like I gotta make this bigger than the others. So it was always going to be an 8-issue arc. And then Archaea, Boom came to me a couple years ago and said, we think we would like you to split up Weasel War into 2 volumes.
So 12.
And well, no, to do it as 2 4-issue arcs, to keep the overall number the same. But and I still haven't completely wrapped my head around how that's going to adjust the middle of the story. I'm still working on doing that because you don't want someone to finish what would be like a collection, volume 1 of Weasel War, and it just be like the normal pause break you would have between issues. You want that to have some kind of an arc. And I'm still kind of figuring out how to fix the middle of what would be the middle of the story to also kind of work as a nice pause / the end, before you pick up the rest. So, but yeah, that's the plan.
So for those not in the know, the Weasel War of 1149 has been mentioned since the very first issue of Mouse Guard. 1149 is actually the very first idea you've ever had.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was originally. So Mouse Guard dates back to an anthropomorphic thing that I was working on in high school, where it was lots of talking animal species as basically like a D&D party. There was a ferret and a tiger and a bear and a rabbit and a fox and a duck and a possum. And I decided I would name it just based on a medieval year. And I went to the encyclopedia and I think I looked at like, oh, what is a medieval? What are the dates for medieval period? And I saw the date range and I was like, I don't want to set it too early. I don't want to set it too late. And then I had a computer game at that time, an old DOS-based computer game called Defender of the Crown. And it was one of my favorite games. It's a strategy game. And when it pops up, it says the date and it's always it's October of 1149. And I was like, well, that just sounds like that's a good number as a title, 1149. Like for some reason, 1148 or 1147 or 1152 or whatever sounded weird to use by itself. Like those weren't good numbers, but 1149, just for whatever reason, had this nice ring. So I called that thing 1149. And then as Mouse Guard actually developed out of that, I was like, oh yeah, well in 1149, there's this huge war with the Weasels. And then years later, when I actually said, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to draw a comic of this thing, I went, well, my first comic shouldn't be where I'm tackling this massive war with, hundreds of mice and political factions. And, I have to show the villain side and the hero side. And that's too much. That seems a little too epic for me to do as a first try. How about my first issue is some mice go out looking for a missing merchant. It's kind of like your Watchmen thing. Instead of a squid alien tentacle thing appearing in New York, which is actually a hoax to unify the world and stop the doomsday clock, instead of telling that story, there's a break-in at the bank. I basically did that. And I reference it. I wanted to include it in the first issue of Mouse Guard, so I referenced that there was this huge war with the Weasels in 1149. And I've hinted at it through the series, but now it's time to do that story.
How much of it did you already have in mind, like all the details of the Weasel War? Because we see hints of it, obviously, and especially in winter with the bats.
Well, I know the bat stuff was created for winter.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, with a stronghold.
Oh, you mean the Dark Heather. Well, I mean, I knew that there was going to be a place called Dark Heather. I had no idea what it was going to look like until it was time to draw winter. I actually had something kind of different in mind until I went gathering resource material and just went, I think I need to change what I was going to do. That's a hard question to answer without Weasel War being out, because with, if it was out, I could say this, and this were already planned. The rest of this stuff I'm having to come up with now. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, but there's some major stuff was established. Some of it's actually in the role-playing game about this Weasel warlord, and the stuff that's in winter about the mice being down in those dungeons, the piles of bones in the dungeons.
There's at least one casualty that's confirmed from the Weasel War. Based on winter, and he also has ties to Keleno.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so is it a small community? Does everyone kind of know each other through 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
I'm sure that probably, I mean, to some degree. It's kind of like a high school class, right? Like there are people in your graduating class that weren't in any of your classes, but you still know them because probably somebody who's your friend has a class with them at some point during the day.
Yeah, you
could probably name most of the people in your high school graduating class, but there are a couple faces where you're like, I know that guy's face.
You know of that person.
I know. I might not even know her name or know of her or know of him, but I recognize them. I think they have a locker on the 3rd floor. I think, but there's a handful of those. The majority of the people you've either had their names, their faces, or you actually have some kind of you've had conversations with them. You have a relationship. I assume the guard is kind of like that. You have some acquaintance with almost everybody who's active patrol.
One of the things I find admirable about the Black Axe is you introduce the ferrets, which is a kind of weasel, but you make it so that they're not evil. So is that a conscious choice to kind of yeah,
it was. I kind of messed up. So what there's a trope in talking animal fiction in that foxes, weasels, snakes tend to be inherently bad guys. They're always going to be the bad guy. Weasels, more so than pretty much any other species, end up being the bad guys. And on a deeper level, what that points to isn't the idea of being born inherently good or being born inherently bad, or whatever our hero group has written off an entire species the minute that they're born as a villain. Now, part of this is the analogy doesn't work between how we relate as humans and how the animal world works, because if you're racist against another culture, chances are that culture isn't going to be eating your babies, literally, and when you're talking about snakes and mice or weasels and mice, they are.
Food chain.
Right, and it's a natural food chain kind of a thing. But when you start anthropomorphizing them, when you start writing this as a story, you do have a responsibility to kind of go, how am I going to treat some of this stuff? What is the subtext? What does this all actually mean? So I wanted to show some weasels who still have that food chain thing. They're not, all of a sudden like vegetarian vampire. It's not that trope. It's like, well, no, we still totally eat flesh and we'd eat you, mouse, but I have a sense of honor. Somebody who blatantly murders mice at every chance versus I eat when I'm hungry is a different thing.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do that in Black Axe with those ferrets. Unfortunately, I ended up making it just ferrets, which then kind of goes into saying like, well, weasels are probably bad unless you're born a ferret, and then you're probably honorable. I hope that people take away the larger lesson, which is that it's your actions and behaviors that inform, who you are, and if you're good, if you're evil, if you're some gray area, and not the species or the fur markings or whatever that you're born with.
I can't wait to see your designs for the weasels because with the ferrets, they work on 4 legs and they work on 2 legs. And I know watching enough Disney documentaries back then about Beauty and the Beast that that's very difficult to do.
I don't think I've drawn any weasels on 4 legs for Weasel War yet. Now I say, I know I did in Black Axe. Part of the reason for Black Axe is when you're doing panels with a really tall weasel and a really small mouse, if you want them in the same panel, you're either always doing these big pulled back shots, or you got to get the weasel down closer to the face level of a mouse. But I do like the idea of occasionally putting in. I wish I had done it more with the mice. I wish I had shown the mice that they maybe run or walk briskly on the 2 legs, but when they have to run, when they have to huff it, I wish that I had shown them like scabbarding their sword and clipping it in so that they can 4 legs scurry. I wish I had done that. And I'll take any chance I can get in Weasel War to do that with the weasels as well. But so far, I don't think I've done the 4 legs.
You do have this evolution of the design for the mice, though, because even in Black Axe, the ears get more rounded. Oh,
yeah.
What was the impetus for that within the story?
I wanted to, I wanted to draw from the very get-go with, that on the job training with the first issue. I needed to be able to draw these characters over and over and over. So I couldn't look at real mouse reference for all of my poses and angles. So I kind of came up with a shorthand for when I draw this, it looks like a mouse. And that got to be the thing. And some of those visualizations got shortcuts. And I found that the ears were getting pointier and pointier. Now, I still saw it as referencing back to the kind of almond shape that a mouse's ear actually is. And then when Gene Ha was going to be doing, I think it was after he finished his Legends of the Guard story in the first volume of Legends of the Guard, he said, "Oh, I love how you draw the mice with cat's ears, so that they're like more. It makes them more aggressive. They're kind of like these predator mice now. They're not just your average scurrying mouse. They're a guard mouse. They're braver. They're bolder. They have a little bit of predator blood in them because they have these kind of like almost cat ears." And I was like, "No, I don't draw them with cat ears." And he's like, "Yeah, you do. Look." And he kind of pointed out the shape stuff, and I was like, "Oh crap, you're right. I'm totally drawing them like cat's ears. That's not cool." And I wanted to change it from that minute going forward, but I knew I couldn't just overnight switch it. So I did a slow transition, and by Black Axe, I was overcompensating to the point where they're these like weird Mickey, but they're also kind of furry. So they're like giant teddy bear ears. They're really, yeah. I mean, it's all growth, right? I'm still messing with some of those designs, and it depends on how I draw them too, like what angle. Sometimes when I'm drawing them straight on, there's a little bit more stylization, but then I'll do something that's a little like turn with an up tilt, and now they start to look more like I referenced a real mouse photo. And it's all about just trying to make sure that has enough consistency within the issue that you never lose track of what characters are which, or you suddenly think that that's a different species, like, oh, that's not a mouse anymore. But yeah, drawing's hard.
He ask you a couple of questions about the mechanics of the world of Mouse Guard.
Okay.
So in Mouse Guard, the smallest animal is mouse, and the biggest animal is a grizzly bear.
Yeah, well, at least that's what I want to focus on. I mean, I think that where the mice are on a planet that's probably very similar to Earth, and beyond their little territory, if you go out far enough and get to deep sea, you're going to get to whales, and you're going to, there could be elephants on other lands, etc. What I want to draw, the largest that I would deal with as characters, the smallest is going to be a mouse, the largest would be a bear.
And they're all
as characters.
Are they're all sentient, they all have languages of their own, but they don't necessarily understand each other. What would the barrier be for them to be able to understand each other? Because Kellogg can understand an owl, but with great effort. And
right. Yeah. So I mean, I thought about like the genus species kind of thing, and that the closer related an animal is to the other animal, the easier time the language is going to be. We deal here in the U.S. with different dialects of English. Over in the UK, there's a similar thing. You can tell what region someone is from based on their accent. Sometimes the accents get so thick that people even go like, are they still speaking English? And it's just a thick accent. And they're like, yes, of course I'm speaking English, but through some kind of a regional dialect. So I figure like when you're talking with your same species, there's almost no difference. The further you get away, those accents start to become more pronounced and thicker. And then to the point where maybe it's a different language, like someone speaking German and you don't speak German. You can tell it's language. You can tell that they're saying things. Maybe you pick up a couple, maybe if it's Spanish or something like that, you can even pick up a couple words that are similar enough to English that you're like, oh, I got that part. So the further away from your own species you go in that kind of genus, our scientific understanding of animal species, that's kind of the basis I use for understanding the language. And that there are certain mice who will either through study or just kind of inherent patience and understanding start to be able to pick up the meaning or the language, or be able to understand or mimic the sounds enough to speak to the other animals. But that it's not an easy thing. That's a trained skill or a lucky skill.
In this universe, would a mouse be different from a rat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't include rats. Like they're not even in the role-playing game. And I have people who are rat fans of rats, like they have pet rats or they love rats in fiction, and they're like, why aren't there rats in Mouse Garden? And I didn't put them in for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want to put in any kind of animal that I feel gives the reader a sensibility of domestication or human civilization. And when you're talking about medieval rats, I associate it with the plague and with medieval cities that are having all kinds of, rat problems. You get into the Pied Piper of Hamelin kind of a stuff. You get into the plague. You get into, almost like a Terry Gilliam-esque vision of a medieval town that's just scurrying with rats when people move milk buckets, etc.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to think that when a rat shows up, it's because they just came from the human civilization over the hill. There are no humans in Mouse Guard. So I wanted to keep that away. And then also, what is a rat compared to a mouse? They're to borrow a Norm Macdonald joke, it's, scientists have bred a new version of the mouse that is bigger, stronger, and more aggressive. They call their new invention the rat. It's like, well, if I was going to make this a societal thing where here's this other species, they're rats, and they would just be kind of another version of mouse. And then you have, it's more like these diplomatic differences between the two groups to reconcile. And I didn't want to start making, essentially like different houses, like House Atreides or House Targaryen or whatever from I didn't want to do that.
Don't want to do that.
The differences are kind of just politically based, changes, slight differences in species. I want, when there's a difference, it to be a bigger thing.
And the Weasel War of 1149, how would you have a timeline for that at this point?
I do not. I'm very lucky that my publisher and the fans have so far been understanding, and that it's a hard book that took me a while to get started on. The second I got started on it is when my mom got sick. And then now that we're past that, it's been long enough. I'm having to shake off so much rust. But I need to get far enough finished with the issues that when we start publishing issue 1, that by the time we need to publish like issue 4 of the first volume, I would be able to be done with the whole series.
Yeah.
As they're coming out monthly, or originally Mouse Guard came out bi-monthly. I don't know if RK would want to do the release bi-monthly, or I think they'd probably want to do monthly. So I need to be close enough done with the last issue that by the time it needs to go to the press, you know, nobody's waiting on me. And I'm not at that depth yet. I'm not there yet.
I'm actually very curious about that because I know that in Marvel and DC, a lot of sales are, a lot of series are justified or backed up by the sales figures of their monthlies. But I imagine that most of your revenue is probably coming from the hardcover collections.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what is the barometer on a monthly basis like for you?
Oh, I mean the month. So I can only speak for myself. I haven't had real conversations with Archaea about what their business model is with this stuff. But I remember Mike Mignola talking about issues back it was like right at the dawn of digital comics coming out or trades becoming a bigger profit margin for retailers. And you know, we've been talking about the demise of the single issue forever. And somehow that question came up with Mignola and whether it was worth it or not to still do single issues. And he was like, look, we already know I'm collecting these into a trade. So we need to publish the issues so that I have goals to kind of hit to get the trade done, because otherwise it's just this massive amount of work and it never gets done. But if we have these smaller checkpoints, I can get this done, then this done, then this done. Oh, look, we now have a trade. That's nice. But also that when the issues come out, as long as they are, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm sorry if I get this wrong, Mike, but the idea was, as long as every one of them doesn't lose money, even if you just break even on sales, you are getting free advertising for the trade.
Oh, okay.
So every comic shop that those issues are in, you've got essentially an ad sitting on a shelf saying there's going to be a trade coming, and you get that once per month for as long as the series is. And then you also get press release when it goes to solicitation. You get press release for final order cutoff, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So even if you, and I even took that further to go like, well, even if you lose money, there's an advertising budget, right? Like the benefit of doing that would be enough just to have that kind of constant in your eye presence that a trade is coming. And yeah, the collection, whether it's a paperback trade or a hardcover book or whatever, I think that's the longevity of publication that makes sense. But I like having issues. There was really early on, there was an offer on the table for Mouseguard to switch publishers, and Archaea was completely supportive. They're like, if you want to go to this other publisher, we get it. You know, like we would get a cut of the deal that you're going for, but you know, like we understand if long-term going this way makes more sense. And it was a book publisher who was dipping their toes into the graphic novel business. And what it would mean was that there would be no more single issues. And I fought so hard to be like I wanted to be a comic book artist in high school and early college, then kind of had this realization that I'm probably more of a children's book author. There's no room for me in comics. I'm never going to get my work is never going to be on comic stands. What a bummer. And then I managed to get in there and I managed to get this cool foothold, and, you know, Mouseguard.
You won an Eisner and a Harvey.
Well, it also changed some things with what comics were capable of at the time, because there wasn't a lot of all ages. There had been in the past, but some of that stuff had gone away, and there wasn't a lot of people were calling Mouseguard the new Bone, because there was kind of a gap in the market for that kind of storytelling at that time. And, you know, like you said, we played with format, and there was all this kind of stuff that I felt like we had accomplished in terms of getting Mouseguard into comic stores. And then all of that was going to go away. And I was like, yeah, for that reason alone, I want to stick with Archaea. I'm fine with their publishing model for the hardcovers. But I'm really happy that we still get to do single issues. So I don't know what the overall model is for what justifies a issue or not, you know, publishing as an issue, but I think having something on the shelf is just a good reminder to everybody that it's still going on. I'm not dead. The book series is still going to happen. Eventually there's going to be a trade or a collection. And whether it's monthly or bi-monthly, I think really just depends on both what Diamond wants and what Archaea wants, and how far into the series I am. You know, if it was bi-monthly, we could probably start getting issues out for sooner. But if it's monthly, that would change the timeline.
How violent can we expect Weasel War to be? Because I know you love that story about the crow and how you don't actually show much violence, but people who read it are like, "Oh, it's so grim and gritty and gory."
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be bigger and bolder and bloodier than any of the books so far. But I don't think it's not going to be a gore fest. That's just not who I am as a storyteller. But yeah, you can't do a war book and have nothing change from one of your non-war books. You know, like the scene that you mentioned that I love, that people think it's so horrific and nothing really happened on panel. Everything happened off panel. Black Axe is in some ways like one of the smallest, most intimate stories there is. You know, there is a creature battle with a fox, but it's also one of the more subtle ones. It doesn't really even involve all that much fighting. It's just kind of a chase that then ends in one stroke. So Black Axe is like one of the smallest stories in that way for violence, comparatively, but it has these moments that are like the crow or Conrad's leg, that are a little darker, are a little more grim. But I think it's ridiculous to then expect a book that's about a massive war, that's history within the story. They chalk this up as a big historical moment, that's not going to somehow be more aggressive and fighty than my previous volumes. It's going to have to be. And
the Owlhand Caregiver is out in July. Is it going to be in hardcover?
No, that's a flimsy issue. That's a one-shot. A single issue. It's longer than a normal issue. I think it's 32 pages. And I think there's 2 pages of ads or something like that. Like it's almost entirely content.
It's around 10 pages per story.
10 pages per story, and then I wrote like a little afterword, kind of breaking down some of the stuff about each story and what it means.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait for it to be back, because I'm such a big fan of the Guard.
Thank you. And we plan at some point to do. I need to do more of those shorts. I want to get further into Weasel War and hit some more of those kind of goalpost check boxes before I do more of the shorts. But I'd love to get another collection of short stories out. Like Baldwin the Brave, that collection has 6 short stories.
Yeah.
With Owlhen, we have 3. Like we're halfway there to another short story collection.
I feel like here's another one. The Owlhen Caregiver. The last time we saw an owl in Mouse Guard, it was very clearly a predator.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is going to be about compassion. So I do feel like you're saying something about how it's not about the species that you're born as. And
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I also, in one of the Legends of the Guard stories, Jeremy Bastian's story, when we did Legends of the Guard, I gave some really broad rules for people, but they were like, no profanity, no sex, no gratuitous violence, keep the animal species within kind of the Midwest, maybe Michigan region, because that's what I use as my basis. We don't want to see a tiger. We don't want to see an elephant wandering in. And don't use any of my main characters or my story stuff. Don't do a story about the Weasel War.
Yeah.
But other than that, have fun. Do what you want. And it means that most people are writing stories that I would never want to do myself, because they're tall tales and they're their interpretation of Mouse Guard, which is great. That's what we're going for. We want their interpretation. That's the whole benefit of doing an anthology book. But Jeremy Bastian wrote and drew a story that made me angry, because it was one that was like, I wish I had done that. I wish that wasn't a folktale. I wish it was more based in reality, because I had already kind of written that same period of history in the Mouse Guard role-playing game book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh no, Jeremy's contradicts, but Jeremy's is better. I wish I had incorporated that. So by the time Black Axe came along, I started incorporating little seeds from legend stories that I liked. Not that I mean, I liked them all, but things where I liked them enough where I was like, ooh, that would work within Mouse Guard. I'd like to, in the
Yeah.
main series, I'd like to seed some of those things in that maybe that wasn't entirely a myth. So I put little artifacts and other little nods to things within the books. And in Jeremy's story, there's this idea that there was a time before the Guard when mice were kind of the servants or the caregivers, the pages, the fighters and defenders of all kinds of animal species. In Jeremy's story, it's the hawk's mouse and the fox's mouse. Each, instead of the hawk and the fox going and fighting, they send their mice out to battle each other, and then that settles the dispute. And so the owl hen caregiver is also a nod to that story. We're going back to this idea that the owl hen, this female owl, has a mouse that is her representative.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
So yeah, so it is about kind of opening that thing, but also putting it in slightly a legendary fairy tale setting so that it makes it a little bit more believable, instantly believable.
I feel like Jeremy Bastian also gave you some of the best advice as a cartoonist, which is you better be ready to draw what's important.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. He pushed me when I was working on that last issue of Fall. I had a kind of a route that the story was going to take place, and it meant avoiding drawing this, big impact scene. And I had reasons. Like I thought there was a storytelling reveal that was beneficial from my way of doing it. But also I was like, I don't want to draw all this crazy. That's a lot of stuff to draw. And Jeremy's like, you got to draw the thing that people want to see. You can't have Lockhaven be stormed, have the gates broken down and an army rush in, and you didn't draw that. You cut around it. I was like, shit, you're right.
I've got two more questions. One is just very simply, what's in store? Because I mean, Weasel War is a prequel. So what's in store for Liam, Kenzie, Saxon, and Sadie and Rand?
All of those characters will be in it. Saxon, Kenzie, and Rand are the trio.
Mm-hmm. Your original trio, I might add.
Yep. We're back to the original trio. I say back. We've never actually seen it in the pages of Mouse Guard. But yeah, it's the original trio. We'll see some group dynamics there. Maybe we'll have a falling out. Yeah, there's stuff there. Who else do you say? Sadie.
Is it Liam's first? Is it Liam's first adventure?
Yeah, sort of. This is where Liam gets to be known by, he's a civilian mouse, and like he's a young mouse from a town during this war, and does some stuff that in front of guard mice that gets their attention, and yeah. And he's like a level 0 character in role-playing terms.
And Sadie's going to be there as well.
Sadie's in it. That's
and would we see the beginnings of the infatuation of Saxon and Gwendolyn?
I don't know. There's all kinds of things. It's that D&D or that role-playing thing where, that Dungeon Master thing where I leave myself some space.
Mm-hmm.
I have a scene very much in mind that has to do with Saxon and Gwendolyn, and it also ties directly into a thing between Saxon and Kenzie. Time-wise, it would not occur when this story is taking place. But one, it's my story. I can just adapt that and say, well, now it does. Make a couple adjustments so it does fit here. But I could also do it like a reference point. I could do a flashback where they're reminiscing about something. I might not even have to show it. I could just have Kenzie say, hey, remember when this happened? So there's ways there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
That's such a great twist in Black Axe, because I remember reading Black Axe for the first time and seeing Kelena come back and looking for Bronwyn, and I'm like, oh, is he going to do this again? With like the guard mouse and the matriarch, and then when the twist happens, I was like, oh.
Well, I didn't
You got
want
me.
When Kellenaw explains why it's not cool. But going to Winter, Saxon professes his love for Gwendolyn and kisses her in front of lots of other mice. Like, it's probably not a recommended move, but it's not so taboo that he's branding both of them as heretics, and then when it comes up with Kellenaw in Black Axe, I had him very carefully explain why we have this like code of the Jedi, a Jedi may not know love kind of a thing. I didn't want it to just be a for no reason statement like, oh, this is a law and you have to abide by it. It's arbitrary. That, a matriarch of the guard shouldn't have any preference for one guard over any of the other guard. Like her whole thing is to, rule is the wrong word, but command, lead equally among all, and that could cloud the judgment in that way. So yeah, by having it happen again, it meant that also Saxon and Gwendolyn weren't an isolated incident. I wanted to show that even though there's this kind of unwritten rule or guideline or tradition of matriarchs not getting involved with guard mice, having it happen twice also shows you that it's not like unheard of.
Yeah, it happens. They're human.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's my last question. The last time I interviewed you, I told you my nephew was a very big fan. He was a teenager then. He's 22 now. He's actually here. He'd like to say hi and ask a question.
Yeah.
That's okay. But he says he's not presentable, so I'm just gonna lay over his face when he asks this question. But, so I just won't show him on the video, but he does have a question.
Okay.
So this is my nephew Tristan. He's old now.
Tristan. Okay.
Hi, David.
Hey, non-presentable Tristan.
Hello. I just wanted to ask if in like creating Mouse Guard, did you set up the lore and everything first, or did you write the nitty-gritty details after the story or the plot?
The nitty-gritty comes up after. It's a pitfall for a lot of people who want to do world building or large scale kind of myth and legend and history stuff with their stories to try to plan everything out. Because even if you're successful, even if you're able to puzzle piece together this 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that's all the history and all the lore, as a reader, how do you get involved with that? How do you as a reader get enticed and involved and care about 1,000-year history? It has to come from characters first. So you have to be writing a story about characters and what the characters are doing. And you have big, broad ideas and maybe a few vague ideas that are some like almost fence posts along the way of like, oh, I want to do a legend about this mythic hero called the Black Axe. And there you go. You planted a fence post, and we'll get there. And maybe we'll put some more fence posts down and we'll build more stuff as that goes on. We'll develop that area. But you do it. You do it a little bit at a time. You don't try to do it all at once.
All right. Thanks, David. Really
thank you.
appreciate it. Really enjoyed Mouse Guard.
Thank you very much.
All the books are his. They're not mine. I got them for him for various occasions, but then I ended up reading all of them.
So are those copies behind you his or yours?
Yeah, because I'm like, I'm getting these for you. But you know what that means when you're a comic book fan. You're giving a gift to someone. Thank you so much. Last time you did this, you gave him some advice that was about starting small and not doing a big saga first. He's never learned that. So.
It's a hard one to learn. It really is. I mean, even still, I've been doing this since 2000. I did the first issue in 2005. Now I'm working on Weasel War. I'm like, I still don't know if I know how to tell a story this big. We'll find out together, but whew,
Well,
It's-
you know who else
it's hard.
gives the same advice is Alan Moore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because he got his start doing those shorts in the UK books, the 2008
Mhm.
books, and he said it is so much easier to develop your skills for 5 pages and then scale up than it is to, tell this big sprawling story and then scale down.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think two of you are giving that advice. I think it's pretty good advice. Thank you so much, David. This was great. I
Yeah.
can't wait for the Alhan Caregiver, and I can't wait for Weasel War.
Well, thank
And
you.
I hope everything works out for the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.